Right.
Okay, so this is the fabulous Guardian building. This was built in 1929 to be a bank's headquarters and nothing more. The Union Trust Company Bank hired Ward Rowland, so the same architect who did the Penobscot Tower and the Buell building across the street, and it really became a cathedral of finance. You can tell it's very visualized. The tower on the interior is Brookwood Tower from Ohio, which is no longer made, and so it's even more rare. That on the exterior, it's our local Pewabic tile, which is fabulous as well. The mosaic is of the white pine, which is the state tree of Michigan, and there's a biblical verse. It looks like, you kind of expect to see a biblical verse. It's not, but it talks about the principles of the financial services industry, which is just interesting. And with today's, new thing. There's a Tiffany glass clock in the room here, and the riveting is made of a metal called Monel metal, which is a precursor to stainless steel. It was really new and different at the time. It looks normal to us because we see stainless steel all the time, but they would use brass, bronze, even gold, so he was really pushing the envelope. The reddish marble along the staircase, as well as on the lower level, is called Numidian marble. He had a mine that had been closed for over 30 years in Africa, reopened, so you get every last little bit of that colored marble to contrast with the travertine marble, which is light color. We're going to go up into the promenade area, which was originally the main banking. And the tellers would have been on the sides. Now, if you notice, there's not as much of an echo up here as there was downstairs, because the ceiling is made of some crazy stuff. Okay, so if you look up, you can actually tell it's actually painted canvas. The whole ceiling, but besides that, underneath the painted canvas is a layer of horsehair. Yeah, horsehair. But the horsehair and the canvas help absorb the sound. It was a bank, right? You can't have your balance or number bouncing around like downstairs was. And there's still a bank in here today. So at the time, that was the way to have, absorb the sound and have a better acoustics was horsehair, and then the canvas, I thought, is just an amazing, amazing idea. So now we have two really fabulous small businesses in here. The Roland Cafe, named after the architect, and Pure Detroit, which is a great store that sells all sorts of Detroit things. But it's an example of what's happening in Detroit right now because, especially Pure Detroit, they were kind of like the forerunners of what I call the doer movement. You can't Google that or anything, I'm kind of just making that up a lot. But I've been seeing it a lot lately, so it might catch on. But a group of people that instead of just complaining about it and going, why don't we have this? This sucks. Why don't we have this? They're going, why don't we have this? Okay, I'll do it. And 13 years ago, husband and wife, architect designer team said, how come there's not a store that sells cool Detroit stuff? And they begged, borrowed, got a small space in a building that's now vacant, and opened Pure Detroit. 13 years later, they have 3 stores, one here, one in the Renaissance Center, and one in the Fisher building. And then they said, how come we don't have more local coffee shops? So they opened 3 coffee shops as well. The Roland Cafe here, and 2 Stella Cafes, one here and one in the Fisher building. And they're still here all the time, around doing things. They have their little kids running around, and that's really the story, because that started it, but now there's just tons of young people opening businesses and living their dream. Let's go down and look at the mural over here. The insets are of the different industries that were dominant in Michigan at the time. So on the far left, there's lumbering. It's kind of hard to read, but I'll read it for you. Going up mining. At 12 o'clock, finance, of course. Coming back down, fishing, and then commerce. And on the lower right, manufacturing. Lower left, agriculture. Because we were going through that transition at that time. So just to set the scene for you a little bit, in 1910, Detroit had less than half a million people, about 460,000 people. By 1930, more than 1.5 million, almost 1.6 million people. So in just 20 years, more than 1 million people came to the city of Detroit proper. And obviously the auto industry was responsible for that. 1908, the first Model T. 1911, had the Highland Park plant and the mass production of the Model T. 1914, the $5 workday, which more than doubled salaries across the country and the world. People came flooding in from all over, which is why we have a very diverse population, even today, in the Metro Detroit area because of the auto industry. But it also, the auto industry affected us in ways that people don't necessarily always think about. Like, why is our downtown smaller than most cities? Because we didn't need skyscrapers to build cars. We needed lots of land to build plants. So even when they built the Highland Park plant, they picked a place in the middle of nowhere, just outside the city limits for tax reasons, even in 1911, and took a farming community that was 5,000 people. Within 2 years, it was a city of 60,000, and it's still only 1 square mile. That's it, Highland Park, and it exists today as its own city. And then, so we grew concentrically, but then it was Highland Park, boom, Dearborn, boom, boom, boom. And they built roads, right? The first mile of paved concrete was between 6 and 7 miles at the Highland Park plant. The first freeway was the Davidson Freeway in 1943. The first stoplight, the first all of this stuff. And we just started growing and expanding. So we sprawled before there was really even a term for sprawl. Yeah. And also right before we sprawled, we were like packing it in like sardines, literally. And especially when you look at where like African Americans could live, they could only live in this small area, and their population quadrupled just like the rest of the population did, but the space that they were allowed to live in did not for a long period of time. And so it's very interesting, the trend. But it also, in 1909, they passed the Home Rule Act, which made every city or every little town be able to be its own city and not be autonomous from the county and such. So we actually have 131 cities, just in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County. There are 5 separate gross points. Altogether, they equal 11 square miles. Highland Park and Hamtramck are completely surrounded by the city. There's Rochester and Rochester Hills. Pleasant Ridge is a half a square mile. It has its own police department, its own city hall, its own park. And so, historically, we've been able to, I guess, have enough money to make everybody individually do whatever they want. But it's what sets us apart from some other larger areas. Chicago is 100 square miles almost larger than the city of Detroit, but it's all Chicago. We are 2/3 the size of Chicago in terms of square mileage we're talking. Half, actually 45% the size of New York City, and 1/4 to 30% the size of Nashville, Phoenix, or Los Angeles. But the difference is they have one region, one government for the majority of their land and their space. And it makes things a lot easier to get done. So regionalism is not just let's all work together, warm, fluffy, yay. It's actually like an economic imperative because we think of the money that's wasted and the decisions that don't get made because there isn't one governing body. It really